Welcome, everybody. My name is Laura Wexler, and I'm one of the founders and producers of the Stoop storytelling series. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with us, but we're a live event and a podcast based here in Baltimore. And we feature the extraordinary true stories of everyday people. And so I'm delighted to be participating in this event tonight. I love public health stories. These are great stories. These are adventure stories. These are service stories, and they're just. I'm so glad you're here to listen to them. So we have up here 5 returned Peace Corps volunteers who are Coverdell. Well, some of them are Coverdell fellows. Which of you are not? Just to single out the people who are not. Okay, Liz isn't. Liz already has her MPH, right? Yeah, so she's out in the world. But anyway, this program is a collaboration between the Peace Corps Program Coverdell Fellows and the Office of Alumni Relations here at the School of Public Health. And the idea is that these folks are going to share their stories of their time in the Peace Corps. And then after intermission, we have time for anyone in the audience who would like to come up and share a short personal story about your time in the Peace Corps. So one of the things about personal storytelling is that it can be contagious, but in a good way. So if you feel like listening to the stories makes you want to share, that's right. That's how it should be. And we would love to hear from you after intermission. And no one has ever died in the process of doing this, and you won't either. So I'm going to introduce each storyteller. She's going to share her story, and we're going to get started. So our first storyteller is Jessie Bennett, and she's a MPH student here at Johns Hopkins, Coverdell Fellow, and she's focusing on global and humanitarian health. This fall, she's going to be going back to Liberia in a fellowship with Catholic Relief Services. And she especially wanted me to let you know that she enjoys long walks on the beach with a beer in her hand. So please welcome Jessie.
When I first arrived in my site, I couldn't have been happier. It was a tiny, very rural town in Peru, and I met my host family. And they were just the loveliest people. There was my host mom, Amelia, her husband, Manuel, their adult daughter, Tanya, her husband, Carlos, their 3-year-old son, Chris, and it was very clear that Tanya was pregnant with their second child. We hit it off instantly, and I was just so happy that I'd be living with them, that they'd be my family for the next 2 years. However, early on in my site, my happiness started to dissipate. The living conditions were a lot more challenging than what I was expecting. My family had lived in a mud home with a dirt floor. They raised guinea pigs, and the guinea pigs would run in and out of my room all day long. And they're very cute, but when there's 12 under your bed, they're kind of noisy. There was no running water in my village, so everyone, including myself, had to wash our laundry in the river, take our baths in the river. And by the time I got back to my house after bathing, my ankles and feet were covered in dirt, so I never felt totally clean. And the hardest part for me was there was no bathrooms in my site. No family had a toilet or a latrine or even like a hole in the ground. So it was really challenging. Every day it was a challenge trying to find a private place to use the bathroom. And it was especially challenging when I'd have any stomach issues, which any Peace Corps volunteer in the room can attest to. Those happen often. So these issues are really challenging physically. And I was also struggling with my work in the village. I was there as a community health volunteer, and I was supposed to be focusing on a project combating childhood malnutrition. The Peace Corps, in our 3 months of training prior to going to our sites, drilled into me and all the other volunteers, all the other health volunteers, work with the health post. These people are going to be your greatest resource. They are going to help you get your project accomplished. However, when I got to the health post, I realized there were only 2 health post workers, a nurse and a medical assistant type person. And I saw very quickly that they were totally overworked. They had just way more work than they could accomplish, let alone me adding an extra project to them. Instead, I helped them with some of their work, weighing babies, taking records. One day I helped them vaccinate all the dogs in the town against rabies. It was interesting work, but it wasn't the work I was there to be doing. So I was feeling discouraged in this regard also. But what really brought me down in sight was when I would talk to other volunteers, other people I was in training with who were now in their sites as well. And I would hear about their sites, and I started to get really jealous. One friend would tell me about their family having a big house, and they're on the 2nd floor, and they have a nice laundry machine. Another friend would tell me about all the people who worked in her health post. There were 15 people there, 3 doctors who wanted to work with her. And that made me really jealous. And the worst one was the friend who told me that he had his own bathroom. And so I really just, every day, this jealousy started to grow and to grow. Any little task I had in the day that I knew other people weren't dealing with would make me feel jealous. And then this really horrible jealousy made me feel so incredibly guilty. How could I feel jealous of these other people when I was only in this site for 2 years? The people in my village, they were going to be living there obviously their whole lives, so I felt like such a jerk for feeling an ounce of jealousy. But I couldn't help it. The jealousy was still there, and every single day I'd feel this back and forth of jealousy and guilt, and jealousy and guilt. I think I did a good job of outwardly looking positive to people I was with in sight, but internally I was feeling really pretty miserable. At about my 3-month point in sight, it was my birthday, and my host family decided to throw a party for me, and it was so much fun. Peruvian parties have a lot of food, loud music, lots of drinking, and lots of dancing, so a really good time. My host family invited our neighbors, my friends in town, the 2 health post workers, and it was a lot of fun. However, I noticed my host sister Tanya wasn't in our family's main room celebrating, but at this point she was so big and pregnant, I figured probably not the place for her. However, I also noticed that my host mom Amelia wasn't really present. She would be coming to the main room, and then she would go into one of the back rooms, and then come back, and I wondered what she was doing. Finally, at one point, she came out of the back room and announced, "Tanya is in labor. She is having her baby now." The music gets cut. The 2 health workers, who were probably a little drunk at this point, get up, spring into action, rush to the back room to help my host mom help Tanya deliver the baby. So me and the other party guests are just sitting in the main room now. We're waiting, quietly drinking beers. The sound of music is now replaced with the sound of Tanya giving birth. Poor Chris is crying because he does not understand what is happening to his mom, so we take turns holding him. At one point, I get up, and I'm a little drunk at this point, and I think, maybe I should help. And I go into the back room, and what I see there makes me realize very quickly I have no idea what I'm doing, and I get back to the main room. So we're sitting there waiting, when all of a sudden we hear the sound of a baby crying. A few minutes later, the health post workers and my host mom Amelia come out and announce that a healthy baby boy has been born. At this point, we're all so excited, so happy. The music gets turned back on, more beers come out. Someone points out, "Jessie, this baby was born at 11:30 p.m. You 2 have the same birthday." And that we all just go nuts. And it was the best birthday party of my life. In the days following the party, I was so thrilled, so happy about this really kind of crazy coincidence that happened. Tanya and Carlos felt that coincidence also and asked me to be the godmother of the baby. His name is Jose. I, of course, said yes. And I couldn't get over it. Like, what are the chances that I was in this village, in this family's home, on my birthday when this baby is born? It felt like a really kind of beautiful cosmic connection. And I start thinking that, of course, if I had been in any of these other sites that I had been so jealous of, that I wanted to be in so badly, I wouldn't have had this most special moment of my life. And I feel just so incredibly lucky. It makes me realize that I'm exactly where I need to be at this point in my life. This village is where I'm supposed to be. And it makes me look at my work differently, just like everything differently, that the reason I'm here obviously is because there are such low resources, because there is a need, because there is work to be done here. So instead of relying so heavily on the health post workers that I had planned to work with, I enlist the help of some really wonderful women in the town who become community health workers for this childhood malnutrition project. And they do just such an incredible job. The project was way better with them than it would have been how I had originally planned it. We end up having a really empowering and pretty successful childhood malnutrition project. And I really owe the success of this public health project to one really adorable Peruvian baby and a crazy birthday party. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessie, for starting us off so beautifully. Our next storyteller is Jennifer DaPolito, and she's a public health candidate here, and she served in Tanzania from 2015 to 2017 as a community health volunteer. And she's working on a book about her experience in Tanzania, in which she is seeking to amplify the voices of Tanzanian women and to capture their stories of resiliency. Please welcome Jennifer.
Thank you. So I served in Tanzania, and I actually studied international development in undergrad. And I entered my service really unsure about how I felt about international development. I wasn't sure that it really worked, and I had seen and studied and read about the damage that could be done. So I was really hoping to go into my service to see that at the grassroots level, there was a lot of positive change that could be implemented. And so I really wanted to work on reproductive health, and I knew there was a project in Tanzania that had just started called Huru. And Huru means freedom in Swahili, which is the language that they speak in Tanzania. And it was a reusable sanitary pad project. And in my little village that I lived in, there were about 1,500 people. And there were some small stores where you could buy necessities like rice and beans, maybe some fabric for making a dress or clothes, but you could not buy sanitary products. So I wanted to learn more about Huru. And it was volunteers could have these pads sent to their village, and they could distribute them to girls. And because it was such a new project, these pads were made in Kenya, and they were shipped down to Tanzania. And I knew they lasted for 3 years. And so I wanted to know, well, what happens after 3 years? And Peace Corps wasn't sure yet. They didn't know how these girls in my village who might receive these pads would have access to pads 3 years later. And so I also knew that there was another project in Tanzania that had gone on and was still going on called Zinduka. It was a grassroots soccer project. And at the back of a manual for grassroots soccer, there was a pattern where you could teach girls how to make their own reusable pads. So I decided that I really wanted to do this project. And I found a counterpart at my primary school. She was the kindergarten teacher, and she was this tiny little woman, and she reminded me of my grandmother, and she was very funny. And she said, Jennifer, I would love to do this project with you. And I said, great. I would love to teach the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade girls, how to make these reusable pads. And she said, that's great, but I really want to teach the boys because they probably have a sister, and someday they'll have a wife, and one day they might have a daughter. And so I said, that's fantastic. This is why I need you. So we started this project, and first we taught about sexual reproductive health with the students. And of course, they were silly and giggling, and they thought it was funny. And so I brought my tiny little speaker to class every day. We would do this after school, and we played musical chairs, and we drew the female reproductive system and the male reproductive system. And then we made these pads. And so they're not hard to make. You take a piece of fabric and you cut out 2 rectangular pieces with 2 flaps on either side. And then you can use like a towel or a small hand towel, and you cut out a rectangular piece that you sew on one side of the fabric, and then you take a plastic bag and you cut it out into a rectangle and sew it on the other side of the fabric. And then you sew those 2 pieces of fabric together, and you have these 2 flaps, one side with a button and one side with a slit. And I said to my counterpart, Manguli, I said, do you think the students are going to know how to use these pads? And she said that we should probably teach them. So I went to town and I bought a pair of underwear, and I brought it to class. And I held it up and I said, if anyone can come up to the front of the room and show me how to use a reusable pad, I will give you a piece of candy. And one thing I made sure not to do during my service was give out candy, because I knew other volunteers who did so had students coming over every day asking for candy. But I made an exception this one time, and of course there was silence and no one came up. And then a little boy in the back of the room raised his hand, and he came up and he showed the class how to use this little reusable pad, and he got his lollipop. And so a few days later, I was at my house, and I heard some girls outside giggling. And even though I didn't give out candy, people still came by my house every day. And I opened the door, and there was Delisa. And I knew Delisa well. And her mother was also another counterpart of mine, and she worked at the school too. And I knew Delisa was not shy. But there she was, and she was giggling, and she had her hands over her mouth, and she had a couple girls behind her, and they were giggling as well. And I said, Delisa, what's going on? And she giggled, and she pulled me really close, and she said, I'm wearing my reusable pad. And I know that she could not have known in that moment, but I knew in that moment that that was going to be the highlight of my service. And I still grapple with this question of what international development is and what it means, and what we can do in that field. But what I do believe, and what Peace Corps is trying to do, is to build capacity. And I truly believe that the relationships that I built with those girls and with my teacher Manguli, who is still teaching this project, matter. And I really believe that if girls have access to sanitary pads, and if they can make their own reusable sanitary pad, that it can change their life. So, thank you.
Okay. Our next storyteller is Liz Toure, and she served in Guinea in the Peace Corps as an education volunteer from 2011 to 2014. So the typical tour is 2 years. She stayed an extra year, which I'll tell you why after she shares her story. She's a 2016 alum of this school and of the MPH program and the Somer Scholar program. And she works as a global health program manager at the Association of Public Health Laboratories. Come on up, Liz.
Growing up, I'd always dreamed of becoming a doctor. And in college, I did everything I needed to do to prepare for a career in medicine. And despite taking a course on it in college, I still really knew nothing about public health and certainly didn't really have an appreciation for it. But there was another dream I had to fulfill before going to medical school, and that was to join the Peace Corps. So 2 months after graduation, I left for Guinea, West Africa, to serve as a high school physics and biology teacher. And I was sent to the bustling village of Kolabui in the coastal region. And the main attractions of my village were the high school, the Sunday market, and the carrefour, or the intersection of the 2 paved roads. And I was posted in the household of a very large, multi-generational family. Most of the adults in my family had little to no formal education, and most of them were also illiterate. I lived there for 3 years. We had no electricity or running water, though we did have a deep well in our front yard. And my host family took great care of me. They fed me dinner every night, a bowl of rice and sauce that I shared with my host brothers. They made sure I was safe, and they also took care of me when I was sick. And I tried to do the same for them. So one day, about midway through my service, I was biking home from school on my Peace Corps-issued mountain bike, and I biked past the Carrefour, through the neighborhood, over the railroad tracks, and across the dusty dirt road in front of our household. And as I approached the household, I could see that something wasn't quite right. There was a small group of my host family gathered in front of my front porch. And as I got closer, I could see that the object of their attention was my 10-year-old host brother, Abu. And as I got even closer, I could see that he really looked unwell. He was not his usual energetic self running around playing soccer. He was just standing there looking very docile and had these very sullen eyes. And so I got off my bike and I asked my host mom what was going on. And in broken French and Susu, she said, Abu had a really bad headache, and so she had gone looking for some medicine for him. And in a lot of places in rural Guinea, some people think that anything that looks like a pill is medicine, and any medicine will cure any ailment. So my host mom was rummaging through my host dad's things when she found something that looked like a pill and gave it to Abu. And at some point, I don't know how, someone realized that something wasn't right. But they couldn't figure out what my host mom had given Abu because they couldn't read the label on the packaging. And that was about the point when I rolled up on my bike. So I asked my host mom to show me the package. And she handed me this blister pack with a few remaining white tablets in it. And I flipped it over and looked at the other side, and I read it out loud. Pastilles de Javel. Highly concentrated bleach tablets meant to sanitize our well. And there was a collective gasp by my host family and a few moments of stunned silence. And someone said to me, "Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire?" What are we going to do? And I was completely panicked. I had no idea. And honestly, I was thinking, Peace Corps training did not prepare me for this. So I composed myself and I took another look at the package to see, surely there would be information on what to do in case of accidental poisoning. And there wasn't anything. And of course, there's no poison control phone number to call in Guinea. So I thought for another minute, and then I remembered that I had a copy of the layperson's medical guide where there is no doctor in my house. So I ran into the house and frantically started flipping through it to find the section on poisoning. And I found it, and thankfully there were some suggestions. So one of them was to induce vomiting. In that case, maybe Abu would be able to throw up part of the undissolved bleach tablet. And the other one was activated charcoal. So I asked my host family to see if they could do whatever they could to get Abu to throw up. Meanwhile, I hopped back on my bike and I pedaled as fast as I could back to the Carrefour in search of activated charcoal. I made it to the main pharmacy and I ran in, and as soon as I got in, I realized I had no idea how to say activated charcoal in French. But I described to the pharmacist what had happened and what we were looking for. And he says, "Oh, yes, I know exactly what you're looking for." And I was like, "Yes." And then he said, "But we just ran out." And I'm sure he sensed the despair I had. So he suggested I might try the smaller pharmacy down the road. And I knew there was no way that the smaller pharmacy had it, but I was desperate and I had to do something. So I got back on my bike and I raced down the road to the small pharmacy, and at least I knew how to say activated charcoal in French now. And I went in and I asked the pharmacist, and of course he said no, they didn't carry it. So I thought for a minute, and I thought we have to do something. If the bleach tablets were meant to sanitize the well, then I'm just going to have to make Abu's stomach like a well. And while I was at the Carrefour, I bought as many water bottles as I could fit in my backpack, and I pedaled back to my house. And when I rolled up, things were more or less the same as when I left. And Abu looked at me apologetically, and he said, I couldn't throw up. I just couldn't. I said, that's okay. This is what our plan is now. You're going to drink as much water as you possibly can until you throw up or until we dissolve this bleach tablet and dilute it. So he started drinking water, and I figured we would just watch him closely over the next few hours. And if he got worse, we would figure out a way to get him to the nearest city, to a hospital. And he was okay. We watched him over a few hours. He kept drinking water. His parents watched him overnight. And the next day, and eventually he kind of popped back up and was running around playing soccer again. And I was so relieved. I was so happy to see him up and around again. But at the same time, I was really mad. I was furious at my host mom for making a mistake that could have cost her son his life. I was furious at the manufacturer of these tablets that they could make something that in any way resembled a medicine and had no information on what to do in case of poisoning. I was mad at the pharmacy for being out of stock. I was mad at Guinea. I was just mad at everything. And it was at this moment that I really realized what public health was. It's about these systems and policies and laws that are there to protect people and entire populations. And it was also at that point that I realized, or that I decided not to become a doctor.
Thank you, Liz. And so the reason that Liz stayed another year in Guinea is because she met her husband there. He was part of her large extended host family, and they got married, and now he lives in DC with her. So, okay, so now, yeah, happy ending for all the stories. So now we're going to take a little break, and you guys are welcome to talk with the storytellers here, or think about your own story that you'd like to share after we come back. Like I said, I would love to call on people to come up and share just a short story about either your own time in the Peace Corps or a time when you knew you wanted to work in public health. So either of those would be fine. Okay, so we'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so this is the part of the program where we invite you all to come up and share a story. So I don't want everyone to raise their hands at once. There will be time for all of you who want to share a story. So 1, 2, 3. Everybody raise their hands at once who wants to share a story. Oh, good. Okay. Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay, great. Good. You first, come up before you change your mind. So when you come up, why don't you tell us like your name, how you're related to this event, or if you served in the Peace Corps, any jazz like that, okay? Okay, that's good.
All right, my name's Jason. I am a nursing student across the street, and I served in the Republic of Georgia for 3 years. I extended for a year for no reason. I didn't actually get married. I just extended for a year. So my story, when I first got to Georgia, one of the most important things they gave to me and they gave to every other Peace Corps volunteer were these giant metal cylinders that filtered our water. And I thought, all right, cool, I'm gonna use this every day. And they told us every day, do not drink the random spring water, because in Georgia, there's spring water everywhere. And Georgia is known for their beautiful mountains and their beautiful water. And every time we get to a spring, I would say, no, thank you, that's lovely, but I'm gonna drink my own water. And everyone knew after a little while, Jason has his own water. And they stopped offering it also. So one day, a couple Peace Corps volunteers and I go up to this mountain village, the most beautiful village that I've ever seen. To this day, it is still one of the most beautiful places that I have ever spent time. It's called Shatili, and it's up along the border with Chechnya, and it's this just absolutely beautiful village. But we're there, and I run out of water. Another Peace Corps volunteer also runs out of water. And there's one shop up there, and we don't realize we're out of water until we're very drunk, and it's about 10 o'clock at night, and the one store is already closed. So we can't get any water, but we're very drunk, and our minds are only thinking of water. We should get water. So we see some of the Georgian kids, they're drinking water out of one of the springs. We decide we're gonna go and try this also. So we go up to there, we drink some water, and everything's fine. We're hydrated, and we're feeling great, and we go back home. A couple days later, I'm with my site mate, Gina, and we're at a special meeting that's in a different town. We're taking a bus back. From there, we have to go through the capital back to our village. As we're getting into the main city, Tbilisi, in the capital, we're getting into there, and we're on this minibus, and my stomach just turns. And I realize I have to get off this bus. And I have to get off this bus right now. So I yell, stop the bus, stop the bus, stop the bus right now. And my site mate, she's sitting a couple seats away, and she looks at me and says, Jason, what's the matter? And I said, I can't talk. And I run, and I jump off the bus, and I realize that I've stopped the bus in the middle of the busiest intersection of the entire city. I look around me, and across the crazy busy intersection, there's a gas station, and in Georgia, it is required that every gas station has a public bathroom. So I think, that's where I'm going. And I look over there, and I realize there's 8 lanes of high-speed traffic that I have to cross, and there is no other way to get over there. And I realize, I can't go over there. So I'm looking around, and I realize there's a little tiny park right next to me. I think, perfect, this is wonderful. Don't want to do this, but I have to. And I look over, and there's the most glorious bush that I have ever seen in my entire life. And I head straight for it. And I dive in there, and I have my backpack on, and as a good Peace Corps volunteer, I have wet wipes in my bag, and I am fine. So as I'm getting out of the bushes, and I'm about to stand up, I look to my right as the park goes on, and it opens up to the right. No more bushes, but a couple benches. And I realize there is a man, and he's on the phone, and he is walking right towards me. And he is walking, and he's talking, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, this is not great. Now my host family gets to hear about how I got arrested in the Capitol for doing something that everyone shouldn't be doing. So I realize that I have no other option than to stand up. So I start to stand up, and I realize he looks over, I look over at him, and he sits down on one of the benches. He has no idea that I'm in the bushes. He has not seen me. He is having his own conversation, is in his own world, and I am thanking God at this point. So I grab my backpack, and I step out of the bushes, and he turns and looks at me, and we make eye contact, and I just keep walking by. And so as I see the bus stop, that's if I go across the street, but I can go under this way, so I don't have to pass all the traffic. I see a bus stop, and I think I can grab that bus stop, and I know what bus to get to the Peace Corps office. So I'm heading that way. I'm almost there, and then I see a taxi driver. I start arguing with the taxi driver about how much the price is to get to the Peace Corps office, and my stomach turns again. And I start yelling at the taxi driver. He's not doing anything wrong, but in my mind, everything is going against me. So eventually, I leave him, and I start heading towards the bus again. And I go underground, and as I start going in this underpass, my stomach turns again. And I realize, well, there's no more bushes, and I have to go again. This is great. So I look down the stairs, and I see an old electrical room. And I realize that there's no other option around me, nothing at all. And I go down in this old electrical room, and the door has been knocked off its hinges, and inside is the most disgusting room that I have ever stepped foot in my life. And yes, I stepped in there, and I was out of wet wipes, so I ended up ripping out pages of my journal that were empty, but you gotta do what you gotta do. And so I step in there, I do what I need to do, and as I step out of that room and I grab my backpack and start running towards the bus, I make eye contact with a woman who's walking away from the bus stop, wondering, why is that man coming out of that room? And I just keep walking to the bus. And I think, all right, great. I'm almost there. I just got to get on the 150. If I get on the number 150 bus, I am home free. As soon as I get up there, I jump on the number 150 bus, and I realize as the bus is turning the wrong way and going across the bridge, I took the wrong bus. So I get off the bus, and eventually I do make it back to the Peace Corps Peace Corps office. And I run in there because right as soon as I'm walking in, my stomach turns yet again, and I have a real bathroom, and everything's fine, and it's great. And then I go up to the Peace Corps doctor's office, and I talk to them, and she says, you have Giardia. I think, oh, great. And that was the first time I had Giardia in the Peace Corps. So, thank you.
Thank you for that adventure story, which I'm sure is very relatable to a lot of people in the audience, right? Yeah. And I myself love a good poop story, so I'm very grateful. Okay, there was another hand over here. Come on up. Unless, is yours a poop story as well? Okay. I was going to say, let's take a break, maybe get another one, then come back to you, but no, that's fine.
Okay, hi. My name's, can you hear me? Yes, great. Hi, my name's Kelly. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Uganda from 2015, thank you, 2015 to 2017. I do not have a poop story, but this is my ringer story. It's a story I tell everyone about. This to define my service. So I lived in this tiny little village called Bikira, and it was, I don't know, a couple miles from the main town. So I had a motorcycle guy, a boda driver. His name was Steven. He's my best friend in the whole village. So I call Steven anytime I need to go into town. Peace Corps volunteers are not allowed to ride motorcycles for a very good reason, because they're dangerous. But I call Steven. I say, Steven, I need to go into town. I need to go to the printer. I had a girls' club at the time. We talked about HIV prevention, safe sex practices, malaria prevention, and I needed a handout for the club meeting. So I said, I need to go to the printer. He comes over. And I'm a very respectable woman in my community, okay? I wear long skirts below the knee. I sit side saddle anywhere I go, because I am a respectful Nyabo, respectful woman. So Stephen comes over, I have my bag, sit side saddle on the motorcycle, and we go into town on the back roads. Not a problem, I do this all the time. We turn on the road perpendicular to the main road, it's paved. It's kind of windy that day. And I kind of like feel myself a little slipping a little bit. So kind of shift my weight on the bike, and then I feel something catch right in the wheel. And I know for an instant, as soon as I feel it, I know my skirt is completely in the wheel. I grab onto Steven. I say, Steven, stop. Steven, stop. And then I just fall and tumble off this bike. Steven thinks he's just killed me. He's freaking out. He's like, oh my God, Kelly, what happened? Now, obviously, what happened? I fell off the bike. And also, side note, breasts are not sexualized at all in Uganda. What is sexualized are legs, bare legs, trousers, shorts, or just, legs, very sexualized. So there I am with my whole skirt in this wheel of the motorcycle, and my legs are out for the world to see. I've never felt more naked in my life. Thank the good Lord I wore underwear that day, because it wasn't always a given. I am sitting on the main road in my pink underwear, my legs out, feeling like I'm just about to have a meltdown. I'm just screaming, not because my foot is bleeding, not because everyone just saw it, but because everyone's looking at my legs. Thankfully, a nice man from a fabric store came out with a big piece of pink cloth and just covered me. I was like, oh, thank you, finally. Another guy from a hardware store comes out with this giant knife and just starts sawing me out of this bike. I stand up, flash everyone with my butt, wrap the fabric around my waist as soon as I can. Everyone's around me, oh, Bambi, sorry, are you okay? This happens a lot. This happens all the time. I was like, this shouldn't happen all the time. Steven goes, Kelly, go down to the hair salon. I know the women, they'll clean you up. I was like, okay. I have my first aid kit in my bag because I am a responsible Peace Corps volunteer. So I go and sit down, patch up my foot. The woman comes around from the back. Not only is it a hair salon, but they rent out dresses. They rent out dresses for occasions, for weddings, birthday parties, whatever. She comes out from the back with this giant, floor-length, bedazzled, spaghetti-strapped, lavender ball gown. Like, it is huge. And I look at it, I'm like, no. But then I kind of look down at the fabric I'm holding around my waist, and I'm like, yeah, okay. I'll do it. So I step into the dress, and they're zipping me up, and they go, too fat, you are too fat. So I start crying, because now I'm not only my foot bleeding, I fell off a bike, and now I'm too fat. So they finally put it on over the shirt I'm wearing. They zip me up into it, and they say, okay, have a nice day. I'm like, nice day, thank you. I walk out in this giant ball gown. I look at Steve, and I say, I still need to go to the printer. I walk in with just like a queen wave, and I say, hello, everyone. Steven takes me home at the end of the day. He looks at me and says, sit like a man this time. So, side saddle, holding up the skirt. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. That was great. All right, who else? Anyone? We have time for one more. All right, how many returned Peace Corps volunteers are there? Raise your hand. All right, one of you guys, come on. Peggy. She really doesn't want to do this. She's taking this for the team. And she has an awesome necklace.
Okay. My probably most poignant and meaningful reflection of being in the Peace Corps 3 times in Ukraine involves the differences that I found in the country between the first time I went and the last time I went. When I first went to Peace Corps, I was 48 years old in 1994, so you can calculate how old I am now, but oh well. And I went to Ukraine after I thought I was going to Yemen, and I was all set to go to Yemen because I really didn't want to go to Africa because the amoebas might get into me, but Yemen, was sort of arid and it'd be okay. And then there was a civil war, so Yemen's off the chart. So the recruiter said, how about the former Soviet Union? I thought, why not? No amoebas. It'd be cold, but no amoebas. Okay, so I said yes, and then the recruiter said, well, these are some of the most onerous placements because of the language, the politics, the weather, and I thought, oh, crumb. Anyway, so my 1994, I was in Group 3 of Ukraine, in Peace Corps Ukraine. And it was right after the fall of the wall, and Ukrainian independence was 3 years prior to that. So I was living in a large city in eastern Ukraine, which is now an area that is off limits for Peace Corps volunteers because of the unrest of the intrusion of Putin into Ukraine. Anyhow, it's Dnipropetrovsk is the 3rd largest city of Ukraine, but often was not on American maps because it was the largest builder of Soviet missiles. And a lot of the all of it was underground. But people there had never seen very many foreigners because it was a closed city. You had to get permission to go into the city, and foreigners were just not allowed. So I was an anomaly in this big city, and my primary placement was, because of my eclectic background, was to teach English teachers English, and that was wonderful because it was at this recertification institute where teachers every 5 years had to come in and learn new skills, and one of the courses that they would take was English, so I would teach them. I was the native speaker. Anyhow, let me get to the point of all this. So I was experiencing this very large city after the fall of the Soviet Union, where I would go into a store and there would be the usual display cases, but they were all empty. And you would look at a refrigeration case and there's nothing in there. Go to the market and I could find one type of cracker if I were lucky and one kind of cheese on a good day. And the people there were still had a real Soviet attitude, and how could they not? Because that was their life. And if you think of the map of the Soviet Union, how large an area that is, and the energy it took from the government to keep it closed, so that they knew nothing other than what they were told, that takes a lot of energy. But it also makes people very fearful. And they would, for instance, the teachers were not paid for 6 months. And I'd say to my colleagues, well, why do you go to work? If you're not getting paid. And they said, oh, the authorities, they'll punish us, punish authority, always, and wringing their hands like I am, like this. So they had to obey. Okay, so this fear of the authorities was rampant. Fast forward about 15 years, I went back to Ukraine in 2013. You do the math, I'm not so good at that. And I went from, having been in the east in Dnipropetrovsk, I went to Lutsk, which is in the northwest, and I thought, oh good, I'm really close to Poland. If something happens, I can escape. it's a beautiful old city, and Western Ukraine is not at all Soviet. They're very nationalistic, and it's very pretty, like old Poland or old Austria. So I was in Lutz, and I was doing the same kind of work. I was teaching English teachers English, and then there was a revolution, and so we were all evacuated, and so I was a political refugee. It's like, this is new. Never sought out that role. But anyway, that was very abrupt. We couldn't tell anybody that we were going because if the word got out, the bad guys might try to subterfuge or interrupt the evacuation. So we could not say goodbye to anybody. My laundry was still hanging in my underwear and my socks over the bathtub when I left. And it was just such a rude, abrupt break. But the realization I had of the changes in Ukraine since 2009, between 2013-14 and 1994-1996, is that there was talk. The whole revolution, the whole Maidan was about joining the European Union and bringing democracy to Ukraine and this new awakening. And what I saw, still brings tears to my eyes, what I saw in the main plaza of Lutz were people out in the rain with blue European Union umbrellas, listening to speeches about democracy and freedom. And that's what Peace Corps is about. It's not to proselytize, it's to help empower people. And what people didn't have in 1994 and still are really learning, because it's a long road to learn this, is self-agency. And how do you help people recognize opportunity? How do you have people realize that they matter, that what they do matters, that if they complain or organize, bring people together to do something for the common good, that it's really important to do that? And that's what I saw in the plaza with the speeches about joining the European Union and these umbrellas with the stars of the countries standing in the post-Soviet Union city.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Peggy. Okay. Our next storyteller, Laura Ebone, served in the Peace Corps in Guinea from 2013 to 2014. After the Peace Corps, she received a nursing degree from Hopkins, and she now works at the University of Maryland Medical Center. In her free time, she likes to explore Baltimore, riding her bike, always with a helmet, and dancing. Also, sometimes with a helmet. No, never with a helmet. Okay.
In my village in northern Guinea, the first thing I learned was that health information was not passed the way that I was used to health information passing. It was not like, okay, the healthcare provider tells the patient and then everybody knows. It was done with these colloquial myths that just were just passed around, and everyone knew them and everyone accepted them. So the first one I heard when I got there was that the way you get malaria is because you ate a green mango. Of course, which obviously is not true, but makes sense because mangoes ripen when the rains come, and when the rains come, the mosquitoes come, right? So fine, okay, it's a myth, it's fine, it's not a big deal. Another one I heard while I was at the health center was I had this male nurse tell me that he was protected from HIV because he ate a banana with the peel on. And this is a nurse. He went to nursing school. He graduated from nursing school in Guinea and was believing and telling other people that if you want to protect yourself from HIV, just eat a banana with a peel on. I don't know what it is about fruits and vegetables in this country, but they play an important role. So as my service continued on, the defining feature of it is the Ebola epidemic. It started. while I was there. And with a new health crisis, we had a new health myth. And this one was great. If you want to protect yourself from Ebola, all you need to do is eat a whole raw onion and drink a cup of Nescafe. Great, perfect. And I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. And I was also like, this is an opportunity because this is a new myth. It is not entrenched. Like, I'm here. I've already built some trust. I've already like met a bunch of community members. Like, I feel like I can make a difference. Like, this is it. This is the point of my Peace Corps service. Like, I'm going to educate my community. So I go to my counterpart, and my counterpart, Selu, and he and I worked for the youth organization. He was the leader, and I helped out. So we had like this whole crew of peer mentors that we would train in different health topics. But for this one, I was like, no, we need to go bigger. We want our peer mentors, but we want like community leaders. And so we decide that we're going to go to the mayor and we're going to ask the mayor, like, okay, we want to do this thing. Will you come be at our thing? And like, we'll invite all the other community members and the community leaders, and we'll all do this like information campaign, and we'll just like knock it out of the park, and people will not think that they can eat onions and coffee and not get Ebola. And the mayor's totally on our side. We show up, we're like, okay, mayor, this is really important. This is what we want to do. And he's like, cool, yeah, sure. When do you want to do it? And I like should mention right now that Guinea is a yes culture. And what I mean by a yes culture is that like anyone, but specifically a foreigner, like when you come in and you say something, like you want to do something and you give when you want to do it, they're like, yeah, totally, no problem. The answer is always yes. Even if the answer is 100% no, they will not tell you no. They're like, yes, because they want you to be happy or want to like be agreeable or something. I don't know. So the mayor's like, when do you want to do it? And I was like, this day or this day? And then he was like, doesn't matter. And I was like, this day. And he was like, perfect. I'll be there. Great. So then I was like, cool, got my day, got my venue, gathered the peer mentors, worked with Selu. We figured out what we wanted. We bought juice because you have to have juice when you want people to come. So we had juice, and the day comes. We said 10 o'clock. So I showed up early, and I was like cleaning the hall with the peer mentors, setting up the chairs and the tables and stuff. Like 10 o'clock rolls around and no one's there. And I was like, okay, don't panic. Because also Guinea time is a thing. And Guinea time means never show up on time. Like at least 30 minutes late, maybe an hour, maybe way later in the day. But at least someone should be there by 30 minutes. 30 minutes passes, no one's there. An hour passes, no one. Hour and a half, it's 11:30. I'm like, no one's coming. I don't know what I did. I don't know what happened. And then the building manager happens to come over. I'm like sitting on the porch. I'm like super bummed out. He comes over and he's like, oh yeah, the Secretary of Agriculture is here today. Everyone's with her. They're out touring the farms. Yeah, it's been planned for like a month. Like everyone knows. And I was like, Mayor, why didn't you just tell me that? It would have been fine. We could have done it another week. It doesn't matter. But I was like, all right, chill your ego. It's fine. Like, we'll replan it. It's still important. I still have the mayor on my side. So go back. We pick a new day. We're like rescheduling. I don't say anything about being mad because it's fine. We still need to do it. But the other thing is the clock is ticking because Ramadan's coming up. And I had been warned that you can't plan anything during the 30 days of Ramadan because nobody will show up because everyone is fasting and tired, and it's just not a good time to do something. So I was like, okay, we have to reschedule, but we have to reschedule within like the next 2 weeks. So we reschedule. Day comes, mayor's there. Yes. And then like maybe half of the community leaders have shown up, and we're waiting, seeing if anybody's going to trickle in. And then I said something to the mayor. I was like, should we get started? And the mayor was like, oh, he like turns to the group and he's like, well, this is really important information. Do you think it would be better if we waited until everyone could be here? And I was like, he was not talking to me. He was talking to the audience. And this man in the audience was like, I think it's really important information and we should wait until everyone can be here. And they're like, great, let's reschedule. And I was like, okay, well, that's like, I can't do this. I can't do this until after Ramadan. Like, fine, whatever. It is really important. We should talk about it now, but it's out of my hands. Unfortunately, 3 days after Ramadan, Peace Corps decided to evacuate Guinea. So I didn't ever get to do my thing. I had to immediately pack up all of my things. I went back to my house, packed up everything, and then I did the hardest thing I maybe have ever done. And I walked around my village, and I went and saw every single person that I had fostered a relationship with, and I told them that I was leaving. And I kept saying, I was like, I'm so upset, and I'm definitely coming back. And lots of people, like, we had this like emotional like exchange. But some people said to me, they said, you're not coming back. And like, I was in shock. I couldn't process that. So I just argued with them, and I was like, no, I'm coming back. Like, this is temporary. Ebola's like, we're gonna fix it, and then I'm gonna come back, and I'm gonna finish out my service. But we didn't fix it, and they terminated our contracts while we were back in the States, which was really, really hard. So when I got an email from our country director that said, the CDC is hiring for short-term contracts for returned Peace Corps volunteers in Guinea, email this woman if you want to. So I did, and like didn't hear anything for a while, but then I got picked, and then I went back to Guinea. And I worked on the Ebola task force. I worked on the infection control team, and we were really busy, as one is in an epidemic, but I convinced my supervisor that I needed 4 days off, and I hired a private car with like I had a bunch of Guinea money, and was like, wow, I had millions of Guinean francs, and I thought, this is the only time in my life I'm going to be a millionaire. And I hired a car, and I went back up to my village. I had only had my counterpart Seilu's phone number, so he was the only one that knew I was coming. And I walked around, and I repeated my walk, and I saw these people, and I saw the people that said they would never see me again, and we got to like just hang out for 36 hours, and I guess the take home point is like, yeah, I did come back. It just wasn't in the way that either of us thought.
Thank you. Okay. Priya Mysore is our next storyteller, and she's a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in Cambodia from 2016 to 2018 as a community health outreach volunteer. Today, she is an MPH MBA student at Hopkins, and she's going to be spending this summer interning at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, focusing on program implementation. Come on up.
Okay, so I usually wear this clip in my hair when I'm nervous. So take it off. I applied to the Peace Corps when I was 20 years old. So as you can imagine, I had this very idealistic idea of what it would be like. I found out that I got in on my 21st birthday, and I could not wait. And I spent the next few weeks, the next few months, really trying to prepare myself in every possible way. But all I could think of in my head was, it's going to be the most amazing, perfect experience ever. And my parents who are here today will attest to the fact that I'm a very family-oriented person. So the reason I picked Cambodia is because the volunteers in Cambodia have to live with a host family for the entire 2 years that they're there. And I couldn't wait. A second mom, a second dad. Maybe I would get a brother this time. I have a sister in my in my real family. I was just so excited, and I really wanted to love everybody in my village, and I couldn't wait for them to love me. But when I got there, it ended up looking a little different than I expected. I was stationed in a village called Roniam in Mianche commune in Kampong Thom province, which is in the middle of Cambodia. Kind of far away from everything. And what happened is I got dropped off by the Peace Corps van, and my host family rushed up to me. And the first thing my host mom said is, "You're not the volunteer, right? Where's the volunteer?" And I said, "No, I'm the volunteer. I'm your new daughter. I can't wait to live with you." And she said, "No, I know what Americans look like, and you're not American. You're not an American Peace Corps volunteer." And I said, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And I am so excited to be your daughter. I can't wait for this experience. I can't wait for all the memories we'll share together. My host brother, I did have a brother, walked up to me and said, why is her skin like that? Why does she look like that? And then before I knew it, before I could put my bags down, there was this little semicircle of people, all of our neighbors next to my host home, and they were saying, why is she so ugly? Why is her skin so dark? I've never seen a girl who looks like that. And I felt confused because I wanted to say, well, all of you look like me too. We all have the same skin tone. Why is this such a big deal? And I realized over the first few days of me being there, is that they had seen other volunteers. And they knew that the nearest volunteers to me were both white and they were both men. So everybody in the village thought that they had done something wrong. And that's why they got me. They thought they got me because there was something wrong with their village and wrong with their homes and wrong with who they were. And I felt for the first time that there was something wrong with who I was. So I think in our training, we're told that if there's ever some sort of a conflict, you're supposed to communicate and learn and use the language skills that we learned. But I didn't really have the heart to do that. All I could do was run from it. So I spent every day of my first month there just sitting in my room. Thankfully, Peace Corps regulations state that every Peace Corps volunteer has to have their own room with a door that closes so that they can have privacy. So that was my sanctuary. That was how I felt safe, is I went to the health center every morning, and then before too many people could tell me how to bleach my skin or why I was too ugly to ever get a boyfriend, I would run up to my room and I would shut the door, I would lock it, and then I would just read and tell myself that this is the sort of day that I could live for 2 years, a day with minimal social interaction, a day without too many people telling me that my skin color had to mean something. So one morning, a month after living there, I woke up to the sound of my host mother banging on my locked door. I opened it and I said, "Hi, is everything okay?" And she said, "You need to come downstairs with me right now because we're doing construction on this portion of the house and you can't live here anymore." So I said, okay. I put my clothes into this duffel bag. I went downstairs with her, and in her bedroom that she shared with my host brother, that was also our kitchen, that was also our dining room, I noticed that there was this sheet hung up from the ceiling down to the floor surrounding a mattress on the floor. And she said, "This is your new room. This is where you're supposed to live." And I knew that this kind of broke Peace Corps regulation, but I didn't want to be a stick in the mud. So I said, okay. And I lived there for about 6 months. And the first few weeks of it were terrible because I felt like the one safe space I had was completely gone. I was exposed in every way because living behind a sheet meant that anybody walking down the street could walk into our house, pull the sheet open and say, "What are you doing today, Priya? Why do you look like that, Priya?" So I was terrified. I really didn't know what I was going to do, and I thought every day about leaving because I didn't think I would ever be able to survive that kind of a situation. I felt that all of my privacy had been taken away from me. My only coping mechanism had been taken away. I couldn't call my mom. I couldn't read on my own without children coming up to the sheet, pulling it back, and laughing at me. And I felt really afraid. And then weeks went by, a month went by, and then something over time slowly changed. There used to be faces that popped up, little students would pop up behind the sheet, and I used to feel so annoyed and so angry and so unsafe. And then eventually, I began to look forward to those little faces popping up behind the sheet and sitting on my bed with me, asking me what it was that I was reading, because I realized something. Children see skin color, but they don't really care about what it means. It was only the adults that told me that it had to mean something. And children were just curious. They said, our skin looks the same, sister. We look the same. So I started to look forward to the moments when children would come and talk to me, when students would come and talk to me. And eventually, some of the girls who were in the 8th grade, they said, Sister Priya, we've been watching all of these videos on YouTube. We've been watching Indian women like you, and we know that all of you Indian women know how to Bollywood dance. And I really am not a very good dancer, but I was going to take anything I could get, right? So I said, it's true. It's true. I am a very good dancer. And they said, well, will you teach us? Can you please teach us how to dance? And I said, of course I'll teach you how to dance. So after they got back from their classes in the morning at 12 p.m. for their lunch period, I started taking this group of 5 or 6 girls in the backyard behind my host family's home. And I started teaching them how to dance. And I took one Zumba class, I think, in college. So I really tried my best to pull out all of those moves. And all the while telling myself that this was the only time in my life that people would ever want to follow my dorky dance moves. So I really had to milk it for all that it was worth. And it became a daily class. And those 5 girls turned into 50. And just girls turned into boys. They turned into moms who said, oh, I didn't know you could dance like this. Well, that changes everything. And I made friends, and people really began to love me. And it was through that I really got to sit down with a lot of the female students I was working with, now about 6-7 months into my service. And I said, what is it that I can do for you? I'm here because I'm supposed to be able to do something for you. How can I make your life better? And I was there as a health volunteer, so I thought they were going to tell me that I needed to teach them how to wash their hands, or I don't know. I thought I was going to do something health related. And they said, sister, we really want to go to high school. We really want to go to high school. And I said, well, why aren't you going to high school? And they said, well, the nearest one is 30 kilometers away, and it's in a city, and we would have to bike an hour and a half to get there. And we would have to bike an hour and a half to get back. And classes end at night, so we can't bike home in the dark. And I said, why can't you bike home in the dark? Like, what are you so afraid of? And they said, well, we're afraid someone's going to rape us. We're afraid someone's going to take us away. And we're afraid we'll lose our lives. So it was after that that I thought, okay, this is something I can do. And I started meeting with the middle school director in my village, and I said, the girls need a high school. And I know that it's a really big project, and I know it seems too ambitious, but this is what I want to do because this is what they really need. And it started from there. Me and my Zumba class girls and the middle school director started walking around the village every day to try to scout out a building. Any building at all would do. Any building that could turn into a classroom. So eventually we found it. It was kind of a few paces away from the middle school and the elementary school, but it was this dilapidated community center that no one had used for, I think, 18 or 19 years. And I said, this is it. I think we can really make this work. So it was after that that I applied for funding through the small grants funded by USAID, and I filed for a human trafficking grant because my girls were afraid that they were going to be taken away. It seemed like the right way to go. And we got the funding, and I met with the local government and negotiated sending 4 teachers to our village. And at this point, I did have my own room, but the teachers came to our village and they didn't know where they were going to live because they were moving to a random village. And in Cambodia, you have to move to where you're assigned if you're a teacher. So they had no idea where they were going to live, and that was a really big problem. And I said, well, they can live with me. The female teacher can live with me because I'm used to sharing a room, and it really doesn't bother me anymore. And that's kind of how it started. So the end to that story is that today there are 257 girls enrolled in the high school that we made in our makeshift high school, and they send me videos of them going to class, and they message me on Facebook. But the best part of all is that they send me videos of them dancing. And I still have yet to break it to them that I don't really know anything about Bollywood dancing, and I'm really a very bad dancer.
Thank you so much, Priya. That was such a wonderful story. And I just want to get all the storytellers to stand, and let's give them one more round of applause. And thank you again to the audience storytellers who came up here. It's not an easy thing to do, and we really appreciate it. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a special guest for the evening, Dr. Josephine Olsen, who was sworn into office in March 2018, so about a year ago, as the 20th Director of the Peace Corps. She's raced up here from Washington, D.C. She began her career as a Peace Corps volunteer serving in Tunisia from 1966 to 1968, and she's since served in multiple leadership positions as acting director in 2009, deputy director from 2002 to 2009, chief of staff from 1989 to 92, and regional director, North Africa, Near East, Asia, Pacific from 1981 to 1984. And she's a proud resident of Baltimore, right? No? Yes? Yeah. Okay, come on up, please.
I just want to listen to your stories. At this point, I think never mind. But we were having a wonderful event in Washington where we were honoring AmeriCorps and Peace Corps together, which is why I couldn't get here until now. Now, I know the route up here pretty well because for 8 years, from 2010 to last year, I live in Silver Spring, and I drove 95 every day, 5 days a week, but I didn't stop over here at Johns Hopkins. I turned left. And I was a visiting professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Maryland. And, we always said, oh, Johns Hopkins. No. We would always say, Johns Hopkins, they own the East. We own the West. And so I really appreciated the friendly rivalry. Now, during that time, I also was working in global health. And we used to take graduate students in the 6 health professional schools to sites, primarily in Malawi, to do health. And so it's really exciting to be here, not driving on 95. I am happy I'm not doing that anymore. But I love Baltimore. And Shannon and I were driving into town, and there was the skyline again that I used to see every day just as the sun came up. Now, if we go way back in history, I lived in Charles Village for 10 years. Right after I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I lived on the 2700 block of Calvert Street. And so I have I have a real love of Baltimore, very strong. In fact, I ran around the Hopkins Homewood campus every day. It's 3 miles, in case you're interested. That was when I was young and foolish. But it's a joy to be here, and it's also a joy to celebrate health and to celebrate Peace Corps. Now, I think most of you are returned volunteers. And most of you, okay, I see lots of hands go up. And a lot of you are in health one way or another. A lot of MPHs or wannabes or nurses and related. Just to say that I fell in love with the MPH program, well, with being an MPH and with public health. And so my colleagues over at the School of Social Work, they said, okay, we'll make you an honorary public health MPH, because I was actually teaching behavioral health theory to physician's assistants, and heaven knows how I got involved doing that. But I also taught a lot the social determinants of health. And I came to appreciate, sorry, I'm going to give that part when I really should be talking about Peace Corps, but I fell in love with the social determinants of health as that fabulous framework for the relationship between the big picture and the individual. And I mention it because it was sort of new for me about 7 or 8 years ago. So any point in your life, you can learn new things. I mean, I learned it and I was teaching it, and I thought my professional career was over. And here I was going into the social determinants of health. But what I love about it is when we think about it in relationship to Peace Corps, because you have an individual, and you were talking about the individual experience, who you are with any individual. Who is that person? What does that person bring? What is that relationship between you and that person? How do you hear it? How do you see it? How do you feel it? And then what are all the elements that contributed to who that person is? And it suggested to me that when we're Peace Corps volunteers, we're at that piece, that part of the social determinants of who is that person. And how do I find out who that person is? How do I give myself to that person? How do I hear, see, feel, honor, eat with, chase chickens with, take kids to market, get sick in front of, whatever it might be? But it's about the person, and it's then about the family. And we're starting to, bit by bit, build, as a volunteer, build outwards from that first experience, from that first exchange. And I really think that that's a lot of where we are at the point of finishing 2 years at Peace Corps. It's at that very intimate, very family-oriented, very community level. That's as far as we've taken that social development theory. And then we come, and as we go into graduate school, particularly in health, as I say, I taught it in social work. I was determined to teach it. That we then take the learning from Peace Corps and we grow it, and we develop it, and we expand it. And why I think it helps us become such good professional health leaders, whichever form of health we choose to take, that the intimacy of that first experience of finding that piece within the model, that you then develop the curiosity of, why is this family who it is? Why is this individual who he is? What made this? And then that's where all the questions take you, all those fabulous directions of figuring out what influences a particular situation. And for that reason, and just to give one quick example, and I'm going to be rambling a little bit, and then I'll decide that we probably rambled enough. But last week, I was at Boston University, and we were celebrating them being part of the top 25 producing universities. And they decided to Skype in a currently serving Peace Corps volunteer in Moldova. And, he just talked about, everybody was like crying. His experience was so extraordinary. But the part that really struck me was, I asked him, again, it's sort of really strange that the sun was setting in Moldova and we were looking across the river in Boston, and it was early morning. But asked him, what is this experience for you, knowing that you're going to go forward in whatever you're going to do next? And he was very specific, saying he was second year, that he'd already applied and was accepted into medical school, and was saying, let me tell you why this is critical for medical school. It was critical for medical school for just the reasons we talked about. He said, I'm understanding what a whole human being is. I'm understanding all the elements that make that person who she is, who he is, who the parent is, who the child is. And there were lots of grandkids in the house where he was living. And he said, I would never have known how to think that way, how to hear the story, understand the human being is as I go into medical school if I did not have Peace Corps. And even as my future might be working with patients, working with individuals, I now know how to ask those questions. I now know how to hear because of my Peace Corps experience. And I was so taken that how that experience frames that professional career that follows. I was going to semi-relate it to a question that I often ask returned Peace Corps volunteers of what was the moment? And it comes back a little bit to picking up the latter part of your story, and I'm going to play with it a little bit. But I ask a returned volunteer, what was the moment that you knew you belonged? Moment. I don't want the month, I don't want the year. I want the moment that you knew you belonged to wherever you were. And think about it for a moment. What is that moment? Moment. Because that's a key way of thinking about a Peace Corps experience. Because it's when you know that you have moved from being here, whatever here is, to really being there, and that there has become the intimacy of the closeness, of the values, of the sharing that you have with your host family and your host community. For example, probably not the best example, but I remember one returned volunteer telling me that she was in the DR and she came home after about a year for a wedding and then went back. And, it had been a nice time the first year, and her host family and such were all very good, but there she was. So she flew back, and so you fly into the capital city, and then you take the big bus, and then the littler bus, and then the donkey, and then you end up walking. And so you're coming down that pathway, that last little bit to her village, walking. And her host mother came running out to her. Running. I can't wait for you to be back. Let me tell you what's happened while you're gone. So-and-so ran off with so-and-so. Someone's having an affair with so-and-so. Someone beat up so-and-so. And she went, I knew I belonged. They had never shared all that stuff with me before. Now I was in the in-group. I was in the gossip group of the women. And it was such a moment for her because she then knew that she could be honest, they could be honest, and the real discovery, the real caring takes place. And I think, as we all know, and it's partly what you were saying, it takes months to get there. It takes months of trying. I'll give one of my own examples of, my examples are also old. I get a little nervous telling it, but I'll tell this one. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia, and every day I ate with a host family. I didn't live with the family, but I spent 2 or 3 hours a day with them. And we became very, very close, really like family. And I learned so much about Islam and the, intimate elements of Islam. And so after almost a year of these wonderful conversations, lunch every day, they were teaching me Arabic, and I really was an extended member of the family. They said, we have this very special moment for you that we want to fix our very special lunch. And so it's going to be on Friday. So they were all getting me all excited about this. And so Friday, when I finished school at noon, I was all dressed up. I knew this was going to be very special. I walked down the street. I was in the Medina of the city. And, you knock with the Fatma and it echoes throughout the marble and you go up. It's a very elaborate way of walking into a Medina house in Sousse, Tunisia. And so excited, and they came down the stairs and getting me and moving up. They were all thrilled. We all sat around, everybody was all dressed up because we're going to have this very special Tunisian meal. And so then we go in to sit down in the dining room. You could tell my experience was different than many other people's experiences. But there we were in the dining room, sitting down for this meal, and they said, "Are you ready?" And I was so thrilled, I couldn't wait. And so it all came in, and there it was. And sure enough, it was half of a cow's head. Ear, eye, everything right there. And I looked at it, and it was that moment of, oh my heavens, what do I do? That, every good volunteer just sort of says, okay, I'll plow forward. I couldn't. I absolutely couldn't. I just looked at it, and I couldn't look at it again. And I truly didn't know what to do. As I say, you'll all tell me what I should have done, but no, I didn't do that. And so I was trying to think, what do I say? How do I say this? And I remember trying to find the colloquial Arabic words for, I'm sure this is delicious, and I'm sure this is very important, but let me tell you about what's going on in my head, and my head just isn't getting acquainted with this cow. And for whatever reasons, mentally, it's just not going to work out. Try to do that in colloquial Tunisian Arabic in a way that you're going to try to make any sense at all. And so I stumbled with all of this, and it just probably went on a little too long. And I was risking everything at that moment because of all that we had built over this time. And all of a sudden, they just burst out laughing. And they went, that's okay. That's okay. We weren't sure you were going to like it anyway. And said, go in the kitchen and fix something for yourself. But what I take away from that was, that moment. But that moment was, as we say, you take this risk, they take a risk, and you figure out that you really are there for each other. You're really part of each other's families. And for anyone with this Peace Corps experience, it takes time to get to that moment. And yet that moment stays with us the rest of our lives. And we use that moment in all the other experiences that we have. And we use that moment in our professional careers. Because that's the moment that makes us competent, makes us good, helps us make a difference, and be able to be present for people all the way forward as we go forward. And I think it's one of the reasons why we all cherish that 2-year Peace Corps experience and the importance of finding those moments, like with the stories that get told, to reconnect ourselves with those moments, because that's what keeps us strong. That's what keeps us grounded. That's what keeps us human. That is what keeps us strong for others with whom we work. And appreciating it and respecting it is how we give back and give back and give back. And so I thank you all for the decisions you've made. I thank you for choosing the Coverdale Fellows Program, for those of you who have chosen that for the program here at Hopkins in public health. And I might say the University of Maryland didn't compete with you because ours was in the School of Social Work. And so we could say, it's okay, we can talk to each other. But I appreciate the decisions that you make, particularly to go into health. And I think the Peace Corps experience, because of the humanness, the realness, the intimacy of what we learn by giving ourselves away, becoming humble, making mistakes, having them laugh at us, and slowly but surely become one with the group with which we work. So let me stop at this point just to say, honor that experience, because it will be there for you throughout your life. And I think having that experience is lucky. You worked very hard for that 2 years. Celebrate it, honor it, and use it to give back for the rest of your life.
Okay, so there's a reception right outside. So hope everybody will join the storytellers and Dr. Olsen out there. And thanks again for being such a great crowd. It was wonderful to hear your stories and have you as the audience. So thank you.